Well, welcome back everybody to week 2 of our risk and reward series for our eGroups in 2025. Pastor Mark is joining us again. Welcome back, Pastor Mark. We had a brilliant session last week. If you were with us, we really started to unpack this whole idea of taking risks, and the wonderful thing that actually when we take risks for God, when he leads us into them, often, and actually not often, every time, right?
Yeah.
There's a reward that comes from it. And what we want to do today is unpack a little bit more of that. We're going to look at some specific moments in the Bible where we see a group of people taking a risk and the reward that comes from it. So Pastor Mark, kick us off. Where do you want to take us today?
Yeah, I want to take us to a passage that I really feel like God's been speaking to me about for 3 or 4 months, and it's actually in the book of Ezra. So often people talk about the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a great book, great leadership principles in there. Nehemiah returns to build the walls of Jerusalem, but Ezra is the partnership book with Nehemiah. And people may not know, but at one point they were actually one book, and at some point they got separated. And in many ways it's the story repeated. Nehemiah is kind of repeated in Ezra. Ezra comes first, actually. And so what we find is, if you know what happened, the Israelite peoples turn their back on God. God warns them through the prophets over and over again. If you don't turn away from these false gods and the way you're living, I'm going to take you out of the land. And that was huge because the land to the Jewish people is incredibly significant. It's their promised land. It's what God gave them. Also, the temple was there. And in those days, of course, that's where the presence of God literally dwelt. So if they wanted to worship God, if they wanted to have their sins forgiven, they needed the temple. So they didn't heed the prophets, and eventually the Babylonians come and they exile the Jewish people out of their homeland, out of their home city, back to Babylon. And in the meantime, they destroy the city, they destroy the temple, and they just leave it gutted. Now, it had been prophesied that they would only go for 70 years.
Yeah.
That God would not take them forever. But around about 70 years later, they would return. And so in Ezra chapter 1, a new king comes on the scene. And the Babylonian Empire has fallen, the Persians are coming in. And you have this amazing moment when you have this completely, to the best of our knowledge, ungodly king who God gets a hold of his heart, and he gives this decree that the Jewish people can return to their land. So I'll just read it for you. And again, if you get your Bible, I'd encourage you, pause this, go to the book of Ezra. It just says this: in the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord fulfilled the prophecy that he had given through Jeremiah. This is so cool. Remember, he's not speaking to a Christian. He's speaking to an ungodly king. It says, he stirred the heart of Cyrus to put this proclamation in writing and send it throughout the whole kingdom. This is what the king of Persia says: the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has appointed me to build him a temple at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Any of you who are his people may go to Jerusalem in Judah to rebuild the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, who lives in Jerusalem. And may your God be with you. Wherever this Jewish remnant is found, let their neighbors contribute towards their expenses by giving them silver and gold, supplying for the journey livestock, as well as a voluntary offering for the temple of God in Jerusalem. And then just one final verse, verse 5, it says this: then God stirred the hearts of the priests and the Levites and the leaders of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin to go to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple of the Lord. And so that's the story. You've got these people in exile for 70 years, but God comes along and he provokes them and he stirs them to return to rebuild the temple and return the city. Pretty cool story.
It's a great story. And I suppose within it, there are a whole number of risks, aren't there?
Yeah.
That it's the kind of, one, you've got to go and talk to the king of this place who's got, no idea or context about who your God is. Two, it's go back and are people going to want to come with you and be part of it? It's a big old risk to take, right? To go back and rebuild this place.
It's a huge risk because what people, myself included, didn't fully appreciate until recently was these people have made their lives in Babylon.
Yeah.
They've been there for close to 70 years. Now you think about it, most of them don't even remember Jerusalem or weren't born in Jerusalem. It's just the quite, the latter years and up people that may remember it. So you've got a generation generations that have never lived in Jerusalem. Their lives are in Babylon. Their businesses are in Babylon. Their families are in Babylon. Yeah. Their life is in Babylon. I was just thinking this week, Monica and I and our kids have lived in Cobham for 10 years. Well, for our younger kids, they don't know anything different. That's all they remember. Yeah. Now you've got a group that was there for 70 years. They're at home. From what we can appear, they were doing actually pretty good.
Yeah.
And now God comes along and says, hey, I want you to go, leave your comfort, leave your security, leave what you've built. That's a big one. Leave the businesses that maybe you've spent your whole life building, the house that you spent your whole life building. I want you to leave it, and I want you to return to a broken down, destroyed, desolate city to rebuild a temple where God can come and dwell again.
Yeah.
Man, it was a big risk. And here's a fascinating thing. The Bible and Ezra is actually very clear. It literally tells you exactly how many people returned. And it was about 42,000 people plus about 7,000 slaves. So, in the region of 50,000 people took this journey. And you might say, well, that's a lot of people. But then you realize the estimates in Babylon that there was probably close to 500,000 Jewish people living in Babylon. So God says to them, time to go home. Captivity's over. Let's go rebuild what I really want you to do.
Yeah.
But my estimates, maybe only 10% said, yeah, I'm going to go, which meant families would have been split. Some would have stayed, some would have go. I can imagine there must have been incredible arguments. What are you going for? Our life is here. I can imagine teenagers saying to their parents, "Are you crazy? My friends are staying here. I've got a future here. And you want me to go to a place where there's nothing?" And yet 10%, nearly 50,000 people returned. And man, they faced opposition, they faced persecution, they faced intimidation. This was not an easy journey, but they did it. And the question that I think we got to wrestle with is why.
Exactly. And I think because I think sometimes when you talk about risks, you think about just doing a big crazy thing or going off in one direction. But actually, the risk that we're kind of talking a little bit about here is getting out of your comfortable life or the kind of the day-to-day that you know, because God's calling you to somewhere else. And I think like you said, a great question to ask is why? God's calling me to this thing. It's out of the ordinary. It's not part of my safe, comfortable life but we all probably want to enjoy and live. But there are risks that God calls us to.
Yeah.
And knowing the why can really help us, can't it? In actually taking that step out. And really the why, another word to say, is knowing the reward, I guess, isn't it? It's knowing what God has for us as we take that risk and as we step out.
Yeah, and the reward in this scenario was huge. The reward was actually being part of the bigger story of God.
Yeah.
And that's what I love.
That's great.
It's like we've all got our little lives, we've got our little things going on, and they're important to us, and we've got our hobbies, and we got our things, places we take our kids, and we decorate our homes, and all of those things. I think God's into all of that stuff. But every now and again, an opportunity comes along, and I don't think they come along every day, by the way, but I think every now and again, God comes along and he gives us an opportunity to say, hey, Sam, do you want to be part of my big picture?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to be part of something that is going to outlast you? It's going to be legacy. It's going to be generational. When you've long and gone, your name may never be remembered, but he will remember what you did in handing on the baton for the next generation.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing about this story.
Yeah.
God's got a big plan. God's plan is so much bigger than what we think it is. And the danger in life is we get, we think about our little life rather than realizing, no, we're just here for a few short years. We're playing our part in the kingdom, and there will be those who will come after us and they'll stand on our shoulders. But to get the opportunity to play a significant role in the big story of God. I mean, if you read the book of Ezra, you're going to find many of them are named Like we're reading documents thousands of years old, and we're remembering these people who left their homes and their businesses, and some of them family, and all sorts of stuff, because the reward was, I get to be part of the big picture of God. And I think in 2025, one of the things I feel stirred to do is in my own life, but I want to encourage others to really consider, are we willing to step out of comfort and security to be part of the big picture of what God is doing. And if you're a small picture kind of a person, like kind of frightens you, you don't need to be frightened because God is faithful. But I pray something of faith rises within us. We're like, yes, I want to play my part. I want to be part of the big picture of God and stand on the shoulders of the people like this who rebuilt the temple.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great challenge to leave us with in our eGroups today. Really thinking about those risks that we could take that actually help us to be part of the big story, God's big plan that he has for humankind. The same plan that was happening back then in Ezra's time is still in action today, and we get to be part of it. What an incredible invitation to take. So maybe you want to continue talking in your eGroups tonight about those risks you feel like that you might be being led into, about what they could look like, about who's involved, about what it's going to take. We want to take risks this year because there's a big picture, a big plan that God's got for us. And I don't know about you, I want to be part of that, and I'm sure you do too. Have a brilliant discussion in your groups tonight, and we'll see you next time.